Are you a motherless daughter? What if we told you we have 20 years worth of truth treasures, pearls of wisdom, and diamonds of hope to help you with your mother loss? We do, and we share all things mother loss on Nurturing Words, Voices of Experience, a podcast by the Motherless Daughters Ministry. Give yourself some self-care and listen as we discuss grief, regret, anger, redemption, closure, and so much more.
Hello, I'm Gladys Bell, your host for today. In this episode, we welcome a guest to our podcast. Stacie is a motherless daughter who has experienced mother loss through estrangement. Stacie has a powerful story to share that I know many of our listeners can relate to. Estrangement and mother loss lead to so many challenges to navigate, some of which we discuss. We'll talk about making decisions such as setting boundaries, stopping cycles, learning how to be a mother ourselves, and how to navigate the big moments without family. Let's listen to the interview in its entirety with Stacie by our podcast administrator, Sarah Lynn Wells.
Thank you so much, Stacie, for joining us today. We always appreciate when people want to share their stories. I think sharing our stories can help so many of our listeners. It can help them to feel less alone, to feel like they're understood and heard. So thank you so much for joining us.
No problem at all.
I wanted to start by just understanding a little bit more about your story. As we talk about so much on our blog and on our podcast, there's so many different ways that mother loss can appear and what that can look like, whether it's through death, through emotional absence, abandonment, narcissism, so many different ways. So I'd love to just hear a little bit of what you would be willing to share about your story and what mother loss looks like in your story.
Well, it's a good question. My story is long and varied, so I'm going to try to pick different stories out to share with you. But the question of what mother loss looks like to me is really just a whole bunch of confusion and pain. And I can physically feel like a hole inside of me, like nobody else is going to be able to fill except her. And I think that is where most of my, I've had to close that off a lot in order to move on with my life.
Definitely. That can be just such a difficult part that touches so many different areas, as I know so many of our listeners are understanding. Was there a certain age when you realized your relationship with your mother wasn't healthy or more typical mother-daughter relationship? Maybe a time when you say that you kind of lost your mother.
Well, I think there were a few times it's kind of elevated throughout the years as I was growing up. And if I go backwards here, when I was in my 30s, my grandmother who raised me had passed away and my mother didn't tell me. And she had kept me from my grandmother for years. Like I couldn't even write letters. I couldn't talk to her. And I only found out by accident that she had died. And I did go to the viewing and yeah, she tried to talk to me there and I just walked right around her because I was so angry she didn't tell me. And then when I was about 12 to 14, there was a lot of sexual abuse in my house, a lot of mental and emotional abuse. My brother was getting stronger with the physical abuse and my mom did nothing about it. And she would blame me and tell me if I did XYZ, it wouldn't have happened. And that was very painful for me because I realized that there was something wrong with her at that point. And the next step backwards, the very first time I realized something was wrong, was when I was 8 or 9. I was in this cheerleading summer camp that my grandma had put me in. And my grandma came to every single thing I was in, whether it was a big thing or a little thing. Like she was there all the time. And one time my mom showed up at this cheerleading camp and all the other parents were there standing and clapping and, cheering for their kids. My mom sat down and opened up a TV tray and opened up a hoagie with lots of onions. And it was like I could even smell it on the field. And when I asked her why she did that, she replied to me, "You shouldn't worry about what I do. You should be thankful that I'm here at all." And I found out later that my grandmother had guilted her into going. They have the same kind of relationship that she and I have, but my grandma's so nice to me that it's hard for me, or was so nice to me. It was hard for me to look at my grandmother and say she's doing the same things that my mom did.
Yeah, it seems like a lot of those patterns continue, but it's interesting to see how sometimes the relationship can be different, as you're saying, you with your grandmother than maybe what your mother and your grandmother were like. I'm very sorry. Thank you so much for sharing. I know that can be really challenging going back and looking at that, but I think it's important to be able to understand, because I'm sure there were times where maybe it didn't really feel like to you anything was off. Maybe it took, as you said, till maybe teenage years where you start to realize that something's not a typical healthy relationship.
I honestly think I realized that pretty early on. Even when I was little, when my parents were getting divorced and my dad used me as a pawn, like he gave me a Valentine's present right in front of her and gave her nothing. And I could just feel her hatred, like rolling off of her, like jealousy. Jealousy is a better word, rolling off of her towards me because my dad was giving me more attention than he was giving her. And there's nothing I could do at that point. I was 3, but it's very clear in my mind that instance of what happened.
Speaking of your father, did you have a relationship with your father, or what does that relationship look like?
I love my dad so much. And I didn't really understand why he acted certain ways. Like he would break into our house when they were getting divorced and he'd come into my room and tell me, get your shoes on, I'm going to go kill your mom and you're coming with me. So when they finally got divorced, my mom kept me from sort of like how she kept me from Nanny, my grandmother. And my dad tried to kidnap us once. And I just remember thinking, like, if we go with him, we're never going to come back here. We're never going to see anybody ever again. And it was an odd thing to think because I was 7 at the time. And so he just gave up. My mom used to put notes on the door that when he had visitation, and it would just say, sorry, we're on a vacation, come back later, which is completely illegal to do now. But I mean, we're talking, it was the mid 80s. So he gave up. And I talked to him next time I saw him when I was 26, and I just burst out in tears and he didn't know why I was crying. But all in all, like I'm in contact with him through Facebook Messenger, and that is it. And I realize now that my mom was right about him. He is like a sociopath, narcissist, because even the hurricane that just came through, he didn't even message me to ask if I was okay. So I still want that contact with him. It's sort of like I want that contact with my mom, but I don't trust either one of them with any part of my life or emotional stability.
There's just so much that you had to figure out and handle at such a young age, it sounds like. And you just have to find a way to be able to work through that. And I know that you have done a lot of work, and I commend, because I know that that is really hard to try to break those cycles. Like you said, with your grandmother and then your mother, it's really easy for those cycles to continue. So I commend you for doing that work to try to work through these things.
Thank you.
When you were doing that work, how did you decide that it was time for you to put some boundaries or put some distance in your relationship, maybe specifically with your mother?
Like I said, it was a progression. I think even after she didn't tell me my grandma died, I was still trying to get a hold of her because she loved my kids, and she hasn't seen my kids in like 15 years because she stopped talking to me. She has somehow convinced somebody to say that I'm the aggressor, I'm the narcissist. So she thinks she's cutting me off. So when I realized she wasn't reacting at all to me saying, look, I know you hate me, but you loved my kids. Do you want to see them? I'm okay with that. She never replied at all. And that's when I thought, why am I even trying with this? I probably lost what your question was, though. Can you repeat your question?
Yeah. So how did you decide maybe it was time to put some boundaries or put some distance in your relationship?
So my grandmother had died, and I saw her at the funeral. 2 weeks later, all of a sudden, she sends me this text message that says she wants to repair our relationship. And I was shocked. I didn't know how to reply. She had dropped off some things at my house. She didn't want anything to do with me when my grandma was alive. And now all of a sudden, my grandma died, and she wants a relationship with me, which made me feel like that source, the narcissistic source. So she dropped some things off for me, and I was an avid dancer and majorette, and I won a lot of awards and everything as a teenager. She handed me a box, and all my trophies were in there, but they were taken apart. Not broken. She took them down from the screws. So that's when I realized, and I sent her a long message back, that started with, this box is really a good example of our relationship where you take things that I'm prideful for and you completely take them down to the screws. And that was the last time that was not the last time I talked to her. Then I'll never forget this day. It was May 21st, 2021. And I had again convinced myself that if I just apologized to her for whatever she wanted, I would do that. I would do that because I missed her so much. And the thing is, I missed the mother that wasn't there. I miss the mother I made up in my head. Okay. And somehow I just constantly would convince myself that she would just take my apology, and tell me she loved me and bring me back as a daughter. I called her, and all she was doing was screaming at me about how much she hates me, and she wanted the things I stole returned to her. And I didn't understand what she was talking about. And she named 3 specific things, like little things. And when she said it happened, I was like, Mom, I was paralyzed in Florida at the time. You're in Pennsylvania. That could not have happened. And then she went on and on and on. And then she was like, you left your little toddler out as the lookout for me coming. And I'm like, you're telling me I left my toddler alone on your porch? And she's like, yep, I saw it. And then she kept screaming at me. And just so at the end of the conversation, I said, I just called to tell you I love you. And she goes, well, I don't really care about that. I want my things back. And if you don't give my things back, then we have nothing left to say. And I said, well, I don't have them. And then she hung up on me. And I ended up on the floor of my office sobbing, like ugly sobbing, snot coming out, and she had thrown me into such a negative loop that I did end up spending a few days in the mental hospital because I was just, I feel like I lost her and they lost me at the same time. So yeah, I just called to tell her I love her and I want to work things out. And she accused me of stealing and kept screaming about how much she hates me.
It's so devastating sometimes how we have to grieve someone even while they're living. It's like we're grieving that relationship that never was sometimes even, or a relationship that we wanted or needed. As someone who I've both lost a parent through death and also have an estrangement with a parent, it is a different experience, but it is a real grief still of losing someone who can't or won't reconcile.
And I sort of went through the same thing that you did. It wasn't a parent, but my grandmother was my mother. So I lost both of them at the same time. And it was really hard to kind of deal with that. My husband's like a saint. But yeah, it's difficult to deal with. And doing it alone was even more. I don't know that I would be able to sit here and tell you that I'm better than I've ever have been if it wasn't for my husband and that trip to the hospital, because it really made me see from a different perspective what was going on.
Yeah. Sometimes we just need that other perspective. I know, as you mentioned, kind of going through this alone, I know you talked a little bit about relationship with your grandmother and losing her and your relationship with your father. Do you have other family that your relationship with your mother affected your relationship with them? Yeah. Maybe siblings or other family members?
Well, my brother, she triangulated pretty quickly with my brother and I. And when we were older, and, the stupid Easter story where we were coming up from where we lived to Pennsylvania for Easter, and I called her and I said, hey, you guys went to Easter together. And then she had rearranged everything. And I took that as she was really excited I was there. And then she told my brother that I changed my mind and they're going to do this now for Easter. He was so mad at me. He honestly did not believe that my mom did this. And he called me the drama queen in the family and I'm always causing trouble and that sort of thing. But beyond, I have no family. She made sure of that. They called the flying monkeys. We have a very, very, very large family. And she told everybody bad things about me and nobody will talk to me. And I believe that is because I started going public through, government laws that are coming out. And I started telling my story. And I think in order to have me invalidated, she made up all these bad things about me. So nobody believes me. So it's only me and my husband and my kids at this point, and my cats.
I know so many listening can probably relate to that. I know there's so many situations where there's narcissism in a family, where that family system, as you mentioned, the flying monkeys, if you will, where that kind of becomes the dynamic where the person who is starting to set boundaries or going to therapy or getting help or working on themselves sometimes ends up becoming the isolated one because they're not participating in that same system and in the things, that's a threat to that narcissism and to that family system.
Yes.
So not having that family system, family support, would you say that there are times where that can be really challenging, maybe in the big moments and other times where you're expected to be around family, things like that? What would you say is the hardest part about being estranged from your mother? Or when do you feel like you're missing out the most on that relationship?
Well, we can talk about holidays in a little bit because that is a big one. But The largest one for me is I have a lot of medical issues that leave me bedridden sometimes, and I have nobody to look after me. And like if my kids get sick, all I keep thinking is my mom's a nurse practitioner, and I get very lonely because my husband's working and the only thing he can do is give me liquids and let me lay in bed all day. And I think, my mom would know what to do. And especially with my kids, when they get sick, I think a lot about I'm scared because I don't know what's going to happen to them. And I always think my mom would know what to do. And that's when it starts feeling it's my fault.
I'm so sorry. I know it can be really challenging. It's an extra layer when it involves your kids and you feel like your kids are missing out on something or your kids are hurt. And all it is that you're having to do the work that they're unwilling to do. And you know that you're showing your kids what a healthy dynamic looks like and how you take up for yourself and don't allow yourself to be treated poorly. But I know that can feel really discouraging and like you've done something to your kids when it's not. But it feels really hard to feel like that is your fault or your responsibility.
My head says that. My head says all the right things. But it's that hole inside of me that thinks must be something wrong with me.
We're going to take a short break to tell you about an opportunity, and then we'll come right back to the podcast.
Motherless Daughters Ministry is alive because of you. It's a nonprofit organization which relies on time donated by individuals to keep the ministry thriving. It's the people behind this ministry who allow us to serve motherless daughters across the globe. And we mean literally across the globe. And since there is healing in serving, not only are we asking you to come serve with us to help keep the ministry moving full steam ahead, we are asking you to come heal with us. Since many volunteer opportunities are virtual, you can be, quite literally, anywhere in the world, and we have both short-term and long-term commitments. For a list of open volunteer opportunities, visit our website at motherlessdaughtersministry.com and click the Giving tab on the menu bar. Then select Volunteer from the drop-down. If you're not seeing anything you'd be interested in doing, but you do want to serve motherless daughters around the globe, then fill out the volunteer form on this page and we will contact you.
So we're talking about things that you miss out on. And as you mentioned, holidays are another whole thing. And we're in the end of October now. So we're approaching kind of thinking about holidays coming up. How do you handle those big moments that are traditionally when family is present? So special occasions, birthdays, holidays.
I'm that Pinterest mom that everybody hates. I tend to go overboard. I tend to have, a feed on Facebook or Instagram that is glossy and looks like I'm the perfect mom. I know I'm not. But yeah, I make sure that my kids have the costumes they want. And for Christmas, for the longest time, I would have fake snow coming out of the chimney with a footprint in it. And, my mother-in-law taught me how to wrap really pretty presents. So I spend a long time wrapping their presents, knowing they're going to get ripped apart. But just so when they wake up in the morning, they see this beautiful array with, presents, which is something I never had. There was one Christmas where I was a teenager and my mom had walked in. It's interesting because I think she was around the same age I am now. She had walked in, threw a black garbage bag at me that was filled with trinkets from drive-thrus, prizes you get. And she threw it at me and she goes, "This isn't Christmas. Take this. Goodbye." And that was our Christmas. I ended up going to my boyfriend, now husband's house for that one.
It sounds like there probably weren't family traditions from your childhood that you carried on. So, I'm sure you have tried to create that for your kids, as we were talking about, trying to show them a different way, a different experience. Have you found any healing for your younger version of yourself and kind of creating those moments for your kids now that you're still getting to be a part of? Has that helped in any way?
I don't really think of it that way. I think of it like, what would the good mom do? What would the best mom do in a situation? And again, I know perfection is not attainable, but I don't ever want them feeling like I did. So yeah, in every aspect of their lives, I tend to go overboard and I tend to hold a lot of guilt if they're unhappy because I don't want them to be unhappy. So in addition to going overboard, now I'm fine spending the whole day with my family and having the meal and doing the fun games. And I have created a night before Christmas treasure hunt for them to find the first gift of Christmas every year. And it's fun because we go to different buildings and different places and they have to get a clue. But before I was even halfway healed, I used to spend the entire day of Christmas like sobbing in my laundry room, and my husband would have to take care of everything because, again, it felt like something was wrong with me, that my mom specifically didn't want anything to do with me, even on Christmas. And my birthday is a week before Christmas, and I never get anything, card, acknowledgement, nothing from either of my parents. So I think maybe what I'm doing is going overboard for my kids so I can like focus on that and not, all the bad stuff.
Yeah, I think that's really easy to do. I can see in my story as well, the wanting to just create something magical sometimes kind of as an escape for the grief that does kind of rear its ugly head even more around the holidays or birthdays, things like that. Because I noticed for my own birthday, that doesn't really happen. I'm not doing stuff for myself, but for their birthdays or holidays, when I'm feeling that loneliness or missing that family, I tend to really go over the top at times.
There are times when my daughter was a competitive figure skater for years, so I'd have to drive her like everywhere to go to these competitions. And then it was, 5 times a week to the skating rink, an hour and back. And there are times I would imagine my mom sitting next to me as I was driving and just imagine her telling me how proud she was of me and how proud she was of my daughter. And that's how I compensated for a long time. Was I also had a diary of sorts where I called it my paper mom. So I'd write all these things down, and then I'd write, as I was her, what I needed to hear. And that worked for a while too, until it didn't.
Sometimes you have to find some strategies will work for a while, and then maybe you have to find another strategy. But I've heard a lot of people who find that peace in trying to imagine the words and the affirmations and things that they needed from someone that they never received from them. So in thinking about those things that we're missing from family, is there a way that you have kind of created a sense of family for yourself, either just within your own household or maybe with others that you've been able to relate with? What does that look like for you?
Yeah, to be honest, I don't talk much about it because I tend to cry a lot about it. I don't know if you call that bottling up or moving on, but yeah, I tend not to talk about it because I'm my own support system. I know what's wrong. I know what's wrong with her. I know the parameters of a relationship I can have with her, which is basically none. Like I said, all my head thinks about this. And I have therapists, which help too. But I know that's not real healthy, but just to be your own support system. But when I get really upset, my husband's really good at talking me off a ledge.
It's good. That's important to have someone. So I'm glad that you have that, relationship with him to where he can be able to be understanding and be a empathetic ear to listen.
Yeah, he really is. I mean, I think he's a godsend.
Well, and it sounds like you're really setting your family up in a very different structure than what you had. So your kids are getting a very different experience. And I think that is a big thing.
Yeah, it is a big thing. And there are a lot of times when I don't know what to do as a mother because I know what I learned was wrong. And hurtful. So sometimes I have to step back and just let him handle it. And I kind of learned from that. I know that's silly to say, but I never learned any healthy parenting skills. So there was a long time where it was just him kind of helping to raise the kids, and I would cook and clean and, try to get through my situations.
I think it's important to recognize that because I think that's why patterns are so easy to continue. There's the anger and emotions we have by the experiences we had when we were younger, but also just not knowing a different way, not knowing what you don't know and what you didn't have an experience with. So I think it's important for us to know when we have some limitations or something missing from what we should have been taught and be able to get that help later so we can understand better, or defer to someone who has those experiences, has that knowledge that we don't have. I know this is kind of a big question, but just thinking about people that are listening to this who are resonating with your story, is there any advice you would give to someone who's navigating missing families during this upcoming holiday times, or even just on normal days? Just something that maybe you wish you had learned sooner?
Focusing on the present was a big one for me because I can say this, I lived in the past for decades, and I did not realize I did that until, I realized how not present I was in my kids' lives for a while. So focusing on the present and planning for a good future rather than dwelling on the past is best advice I can give. And as the holidays, just do something that that everybody's going to enjoy, no matter what holiday, like Flag Day. Just make something very enjoyable for your family because you will feel that joy coming back to you.
Is there anything that you maybe wish you knew sooner in this journey? I know it is a journey and no one has it all figured out, but maybe something you wish you kind of realized sooner.
I wish I had realized that God didn't put me on this earth or in this family to punish me, because I cried a lot about that over the years. I didn't know what I had done in order to have this life. He put me here to learn from the challenges and learn how to love myself enough to remove me from toxic situations. And I know that now. I wish I would have grasped that years ago.
That can be so hard when that gets tied in with our faith and how we feel towards God. It's so hard to separate those two. And so often it just kind of gets jumbled together and our feelings towards our father or mother or family kind of get put on God. And it's hard to unravel all of that.
Yeah, it really is. I mean, I was brought up staunchly Catholic and, honor your father, thy mother. And, that confused me a lot as a child, because what if your father and mother aren't good to you, But yeah, I know now that I'm here to be the mother to my kids, and the best mother I can be and the best wife I can be. And I know she taught me how not to act as a mother, and he taught me who not to choose as a partner. So I kind of flipped it.
That's a big one, because sometimes people end up just kind of repeating those patterns, as we've said, like with parenting, but also with relationships, picking someone that is like what they have seen. So that's a big thing, I think, when you can recognize, okay, this is not what I want. And maybe you don't necessarily have a good visual of what you do want, but you can at least know that that is not what you want to keep emulating and keep repeating.
Right. One other story I can tell you that made me pause. And I honest to God think, what a psycho. And I was probably about 14. My mom, I was in the stairwell where my grandma was cooking in the kitchen next door to it. And my mom had gone up to my nanny and said, her older brother had, she's been in therapy and her older brother had, sexually molested her. And my grandma absolutely was like, no, that didn't happen. Didn't happen. Nope. And so my mom stormed out and said, we're leaving, Stace. And I said, okay. So we get in the car, and about 5 minutes later, I asked her the question, so Nanny's not believing you about your abuse. Why don't you believe me when I'm telling you my brother's doing the same thing? And I saw her knuckles get white around the steering wheel, and it was a couple minutes before she answered. But her answer was, no matter what my brother had done to me was not as bad as what she had done to her. So it was completely dismissive. I had asked to go to therapy. She said we didn't have the money. And then a month later, I find out she's in therapy. I mean, I can tell you a whole lot of stories here, and it's progression. I don't think it happens all at once. I think it happens over time. And a lot of people don't realize it until it's like super bad and they don't understand where to turn.
What I'm hearing is just cycles that are being repeated, but such different approaches between you and your mother. Your mother is feeling hurt at not being believed about her abuse. And I know that's a story that many can relate to, where this is happening and their mother doesn't believe them. But then instead of trying to use that to parent you differently, she just fell right into that same pattern of not believing you either, making it about her, your abuse about her. It wasn't
I've now understood, because so many people have said it. I now understand that she did not have the skills to raise me as her child, let alone keep me from somebody hurting me. And understanding that makes me feel a little better, because she didn't have the skills to do it. Like, if you can't be in the NFL, because you can't play football, that's really not your fault. It just is. So that's another thing that keeps me kind of grounded here, is I understand that both my parents were never equipped with any kind of parenting skills whatsoever.
And as you mentioned, if you don't mind me asking, you mentioned, you also felt like you didn't have that role model, that something to look to for those parenting skills. Is there something that you found that helped you as you wanted to approach it a different way? Was it going to therapy? Was it talking to others, learning from someone else? What kind of helped you to be able to stop those cycles?
Books at first. I remember when I first got pregnant with my first child, I was terrified. So I got books on, how to sleep train them, what to expect at different times, that sort of thing, because nobody was telling me anything. And I didn't know. The only thing, it was books. And then my mother-in-law was a little standoffish because she thought it was my mom's duty to do it. I read a lot. I researched a lot of different things because I have 2 kids with autism, and that was difficult to handle by myself. But my husband, and as my kids got older and they were going to preschool and things, I watched how the other parents were, dealing with certain things. At that time, when my kids were very little, I was at a point where I was very angry with everybody. Like, my anger was almost palpable. So, I would end up like yelling at the school and yelling at people when really it wasn't them I was angry at. But yeah, that's how I did it, just by watching and researching.
Well, I think that's just so important. I hope that is encouraging to people hearing your story, that even if they didn't get that, that's still something that they can gain, they can work on, and they can get those skills. Even if they should have been taught them, they should have had those demonstrated to them. That's not their fault, but there's still hope that they can get those. And
for years, I have been punishing myself, like wrapping myself in the head, like, why can't you cook anything that your family's going to like? And it's been a real struggle not feeding them just junk all the time, because and then I realized a couple of weeks ago, I don't know why it took me so long to realize this. I realized a couple of weeks ago that I was never taught to cook. I was never shown, this is what this does and this is what this does, or you have this option. And I question that, but I'm not questioning that too much because I know my mom's I'll throw her a bone here that she worked full time and took care of us. So I know that must have been hard. So, she's not a total awful person. There's some good things in there too. I wish I saw them more.
Well, thank you so much for sharing your story. It was very honest and vulnerable and real. And I just truly believe that God can use those stories and those hard parts of our lives to help someone else, help them understand that they aren't alone. The things that they're struggling with, if they're a new mom and realizing for the first time they weren't taught how to do all of this, or if there's someone that's still really struggling with estrangement or with a death of a family member, that they can know they're not alone and there's others who are going down this path as well.
Yep.
But thank you so
You're
much.
welcome. I'm happy to do it.
Thank you for joining us here at Motherless Daughters Ministry. If you need more nurturing words, we encourage you to have a listen to other episodes of this podcast. Don't forget to hit the subscribe or follow button so you can join us again next time.